Hello again. Second time in within 3 hours. Having trouble sleeping because of what's happening in Ottawa right now as we speak. Um, I won't say I'm incredibly dialed in, but I am somewhat dialed in to a lot of the protest movement. I've met a number of these individuals. And while I tend to gravitate more toward the religious side, to the Christian side, having gone to churches in Aylmer with Henry Hildebrand, in Kitchener Waterloo with Jacob Riome, done podcasts with Windsor's Aaron Rock. Um, that's where my heart is, if you will. But I've also met uh, a woman named Kellyanne, who, you know, she's a firebrand. I'll put it that way. I consider her. I've never met this Pat King guy. I've seen a couple of videos of him. Not a fan. Not a fan of Chris Sky. Never met him either. No desire to either. But with all this being said, uh, I do stay. I am somewhat dialed in to what is going on in Ottawa right now, and what I'm hearing from both um, friends of mine on the religious side, and even from friends who are more on, the more activist side, is that there are a lot of helicopters and drones and things of that nature. And there's a lot of chatter that the government, the authorities, are planning a big move tomorrow. And my concern is martial law. And it's because I'm old and I know my history. I'm not going to say I know it 100% perfectly, but I understand it pretty well. And what I'm referring to in terms of history is in 1972, in Canada, there was something called the October Crisis. Now, in 1972, I was 6 years old and actually living in a little town, Glen Rock, New Jersey, where I'd been living. I am a Canadian, born in Canada, but when I was less than a year old, we moved from Niagara region, from Welland County, moved down to New York City. So, born in Canada. Very shortly thereafter, before I was even a year, I was living in New York, and then later we gravitated and spent almost about 5 years in New Jersey. So, even if I'd been living in Canada, I would have only been 6 years old during that October crisis. But during that October crisis, a cabinet minister, I believe it was, I don't know the full history, but I know that there was I believe it was a Quebec cabinet minister by the name of Pierre Laporte, who was kidnapped by an organization called the FLQ, the Front de Libération du Québec, basically a separatist terrorist, defined as a terrorist group at the time. And they kidnapped Pierre Laporte, and I believe he was murdered. They also, I believe there were other individuals who had been kidnapped. I think Pierre Laporte was the only one who was killed by the kidnappers, by this separatist movement that was trying to use insurrection or terrorist means to make Quebec an independent country. And so what happened at the time was, with the cabinet minister, a Quebec cabinet minister, having been kidnapped, and Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who is, of course, the father of our current Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, he invoked what was called at that time the War Measures Act. As I understand it, that piece of legislation, that War Measures Act, has been renamed and is a number of years ago, and it's now called the Emergency Measures Act. But ultimately, what it means is martial law. And that means a suspension of our constitutional rights, all of them. And the one that's most frightening, and this happened during the October crisis as well, is that individuals were rounded up. And the way things work in a constitutional democracy, a liberal democracy, is that if the police, if you're being charged with a crime, the police come, they have to tell you what you're charged with. You have certain rights. You're allowed to speak to a lawyer. You get a phone call. I'm not a lawyer, but I know, we've all seen and heard and know the basics anyway. Well, under martial law, that's gone. The governing authorities, the police, whatever, military, whatever apparatus they use, can just come in, take you, detain you with you have no rights whatsoever. And I'm genuinely afraid that, because what we've seen with this demonstration is we've seen government-funded media, both the CBC, which is a government-owned network, as well as all the other media, all the other legacy mainstream media, which is funded by the government. They get $350 million spread out amongst them per year. And what we've been seeing them do is to try and paint the narrative that all these protesters, there are so many drivers there who are of the Sikh faith, but they don't show that on the mainstream legacy media. They go around with their cameras following some idiot flying a Confederate flag so that they can frame the narrative and people that, this is these are a bunch of deplorable racist white supremacists. I saw a great thing that you won't see on the mainstream media. It was Rebel News, but there was a young lad masked up and he was holding a sign and it said, "F your white nationalist agenda," or words very close to that effect. And standing next to him was a Sikh gentleman who gave his name. He said, "My name is," whatever his name was. And he said, "This is not true, that no one is acting like this. Everyone is being fun." But you won't see that on the mainstream media. That was Rebel News. No one watches it. And I didn't even see it on Rebel News. I just saw it as part of a clip in a tweet. But anyway, so what that did, though, is it gave justification to those who opposed the rally. And some people did. Some people are terrified of COVID. They thank you, government. You're keeping me safe. There are individuals who believe that the only reason they're still alive and breathing is because the government saved them with these emergency lockdown measures, mandates, and everything else. They're convinced they would have been dead without it, which I'm going to leave that aside. That's one point of view. And so individuals with that mindset were opposed to the convoy. They've been, opposed to everything. The church opens, they go, they're going to kill us all. If when the any store that opened that tried to save their business, tried to save their keep from losing their home, or that they were all over them. Disgusting, this division that's happened, but that's the goal, that's the aim, that's all part of the agenda. Divide the population. So we've got the people who are terrified of COVID and are grateful to the government for keeping them safe and alive, and then you got a bunch of other people, the camp to which I belong, although I try as much as I can to talk to the other side, to let them know, hey, I just went to December 7th, I was with 800 people in an indoor auditorium at Canada Christian College at an event sponsored by the Democracy Fund. And it was fantastic, hugging and shaking hands. And the looks I get, it's like, shouldn't I be dead? Shouldn't I have at least gotten sick? Nothing. And nothing from any of the people I know who attended. But, now we're in these two camps, and I'm afraid that the government is going to move in harsh. What am I talking about? I'm talking about rounding up the protesters. Obviously, they wouldn't be able to round everyone up, but with all the video coverage and such, with the way social media is, nothing's private anymore. I'm not being private. I'm, Gordon Causey, Brighton, Ontario. I've said it before. And I do support the convoys, and I do support the protesters peacefully, respectfully, abiding by Canadian law, no violence, no hatred. But if the government's looking to round up convoy protest supporters, here I am. And the people in Ottawa, they wouldn't be able to get everyone all at once, but there's talk that RCMP are being pulled in from all over jurisdictions all over Canada, that the OPP, that Metro Toronto Police Force, even like police forces from around Ontario at least, and maybe even Quebec, I don't know, are descending on Ottawa. And then what happened, and it would be done under the guise of safety. It's the same as the FLQ crisis. They tried, in that case, don't know. I wasn't, well, I was alive during the time, but I was 6 years old and living south of the border. So how much I can comment on it, but there's a famous video. You can check it out here on YouTube. Just type Trudeau and then the words, "Just watch me." And the interesting thing is, during the FLQ crisis, when martial law was declared, the War Measures Act, the majority of Canadians supported it because people were scared. In Montreal, there were mailbox bombs going off. So people were scared. And when people are afraid, the higher thought processes shut off, and all you just keep me safe. And you want to have all my constitutional rights and freedoms that actually ensure my security? Go ahead, have them. That's what people do. So this is a worrying time. I'm going to be praying that this doesn't happen, that I'm being an alarmist. I'm not making any predictions. I'm just following a line of reasoning about what might happen based on what I'm hearing. And it's possible that what I'm hearing is alarmist as well, in which case I'm guilty of throwing gasoline on the fire, and I apologize, but stream of consciousness is just what's going through my head. That if martial law comes in, the difficulty is I don't see it being, now when Trudeau brought it in, that "just watch me" comment was somewhat famous, and he was applauded for it because he was confronted by reporters on the steps of Parliament Hill. He was going into the government buildings, and a young reporter came up and started to question him about the fact that there were tanks in the street and people were being harassed and arrested. And Trudeau, as he often did, Pierre Trudeau, as he did, he was an incredibly intelligent man, and he engaged in what's either called Platonic or Socratic dialogue, reasoning. Rather than defend his position, he threw it back on the reporter and said, "What would you do?" There's a cabinet minister is kidnapped and is being held hostage. Would you do nothing? And the young reporter was a little flummoxed and didn't know how to respond. He goes, "Is that your position, to do nothing? And would you not want to protect ministers of the Crown?" Trudeau asked him. "You would not want to protect ministers of the Crown?" The young reporter said, "Well, how are you going to protect everyone?" And Trudeau said, "Well, maybe you can't protect everyone, but you can at least protect some. Would you wouldn't, is your position you wouldn't protect anyone?" And then the young reporter said, "Well, how?" At the end of it, he said, "Well, how far are you willing to go? When does this end? How far would you take this?" And Trudeau, the famous line, said, Just watch me. And Canadians applauded because they were scared. So pray for Ottawa. I have friends there. I have friends there, and I'm worried. I'm worried about people being rounded up. Um, I'm worried about martial law, about the Emergency Measures Act. And I'm worried about the response because I do know that some of the individuals in Ottawa there are individuals who are itching for it. They would welcome, let's bring it, is what some would say. And peaceful loving generally, but they feel like they've been pushed. Their backs are up against a wall, and they feel like they're fighting a war of attrition that they're losing. And so they welcome the chance for a direct confrontation. And that's what, and once that, if something like that happens, I don't see martial law ending. Because if you look at the Great Reset agenda of the World Economic Forum and the type of authoritarian system that's envisioned, people talk about communism, people talk about fascism. I tend to think it leans more toward the fascist side, which is basically fascism is the corporate sector in tandem with the government basically being in charge of everything. Communism, by contrast, communism is there is no corporate sector. The state, the government is basically they own, to use a Marxist term, the means of production. In a fascist system, it's basically the corporate elite have the government do their bidding for them. But either way, whether communist or fascist, either way, the two meet at the junction of authoritarian alley. And for average Joe and Jane Canadian citizen, it's not good either way. So God bless. If you're a Christian, if you're Sikh, if you're Muslim, if you're Jewish, if you're a person of faith, pray. There is a God. There is a God. And pray that, and if things do go south, God wins in the end. I am a Bible-believing Christian. That's one of them. And I've read the book, and I know how it ends. And I also know it's not peaches and cream until the end. It's better than peaches and cream at the very end. But between the end and the intervening time is referred to as tribulation. And I'm not predicting that. I'm praying that's not what's happening. But if it is, I know that it's hard times. So God bless. And I'm going to try and get some sleep and be up early to see what happens tomorrow, because Ottawa is basically, it's occupied. It's occupied by people who want a restoration of our Constitution, of our laws. It's like the Occupy Wall Street movement. They've taken Ottawa over. Nothing will be able to move in that town with all the trucks that are there and with all the people that are around. And I think it would be just very easy for Justin Trudeau to say, we're in a state of emergency. And the loud, frightened population, those who are frightened, will be loud in support. And so those of us opposed have to be just as loud. God bless, and we'll talk to you later.